Welcome to the Honeyed Leaf, where every cup of tea comes with a story. I'm so glad you're here. Tonight we're returning to the peaceful village of Willowbrook, where Clara Whitmore is about to find herself drawn into another gentle mystery. Before we begin, find a comfortable position. Close your eyes if you'd like, and let yourself relax. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do. Just let the story carry you peacefully towards sleep. Now let's visit Willowbrook together. Chapter 1. Strange Sounds in the Library. March brought the first hints of spring to Willowbrook. Daffodils bloomed along the village green, and the morning air carried that particular freshness that comes after winter's end. Clara opened the honeyed leaf to bright sunshine streaming through the windows, making the shop feel cheerful and warm. She was preparing her morning teas when Beatrice appeared at the door, looking unusually flustered. This was notable because Beatrice was rarely anything but composed. As the village librarian, she prided herself on maintaining calm efficiency in all situations. But this morning, her hair was slightly dishevelled, and she had that distracted look of someone who'd spent a sleepless night. "Beatrice, come in. You look like you need tea urgently," Clara said, immediately concerned. "Is everything all right?" Beatrice sank into the nearest chair. "I'm not sure. Something very strange has been happening at the library." Clara quickly prepared a pot of chamomile with lemon balm, something calming, and brought it to Beatrice along with some fresh honey biscuits. "Tell me what's happened," she said gently, sitting down across from her friend. Beatrice wrapped her hands around the teacup, seeming to gather her thoughts. "For the past week, I've been hearing sounds in the library after closing. At first I thought it was just the building settling. You know how old buildings are, creaks and groans, but it's more than that. Footsteps, the sound of books being moved, pages turning, and it always happens in the same area. The historical archives section upstairs." Clara felt a small thrill of interest, though she kept her expression neutral and calming for Beatrice's sake. "Have you seen anything? Or just heard sounds?" "Just sounds, thank goodness. I'm not sure I could handle actually seeing something." Beatrice took a sip of her tea. "I know it sounds foolish. I'm a rational person, Clara. I don't believe in ghosts. But I can't explain what I'm hearing. Last night I stayed late, cataloguing new donations, and the sounds were so distinct I actually went upstairs to check, but there was nothing there. No one there, I mean, and yet moments after I came back downstairs I heard it again. Footsteps, the unmistakable sound of someone walking across the floor above me. Could it be pipes? Or perhaps an animal that's gotten into the building?" Clara suggested practically. "I thought of that. I've checked thoroughly. No signs of animals. And the sounds aren't like plumbing, they're too regular, too purposeful. Clara, I know how this sounds, but it's as if someone is searching for something up there. Night after night, the same pattern. Walking, stopping, books being moved, pages turning. Have you told anyone else?" "Just you. I didn't want to start rumours about the library being haunted. Can you imagine? Half the village would be too frightened to visit, and the other half would come just to gawk. Neither option is conducive to running a proper library." Beatrice managed a small smile. Clara thought for a moment. "Would you like me to come tonight? After the library closes? We could investigate together. 2 sets of ears, and perhaps we'll figure out what's causing the sounds." Beatrice's relief was visible. "Would you? I hate to impose, but I'd feel so much better having someone else there. Not just someone else, but someone who won't dismiss it or turn it into village gossip." "It's not an imposition at all," Clara assured her. "I'm curious now, and I suspect there's a perfectly logical explanation. We just need to find it." They agreed to meet at the library at 8 o'clock that evening, after closing time. After Beatrice left, looking considerably calmer, Clara served her morning customers with half her mind on the mystery. A library ghost. It sounded like something from a Gothic novel, but Clara agreed with Beatrice. There was almost certainly a rational explanation. Old buildings made noises. Perhaps there was a draft causing things to shift. Or maybe someone had hidden in the library at closing and was sleeping rough in the archives. That would explain the regular pattern of sounds. Throughout the day, Clara found herself thinking about the library's historical archives. She'd spent time there herself, researching with Beatrice. It was a wonderful collection. Documents and books dating back centuries, all carefully preserved. Local history, family papers, old photographs. If someone was searching for something up there, what might they be looking for? Mrs. Pembroke arrived for her afternoon tea and immediately noticed Clara's distracted state. "You're very thoughtful today, dear. Something on your mind?" Clara hesitated, then decided Mrs. Pembroke might actually be helpful. She was a font of village knowledge, after all. "Mrs. Pembroke, do you know much about the history of the library building itself? When it was built, who owned it before it became the library?" "Oh, yes. It was built in 1870 as a private home for the Ashworth family. Quite grand for Willowbrook at the time. The Ashworths lived there for 3 generations. Then, in the 1920s, the last Ashworth donated the building to the village to be used as a library. Generous of them, really. Do you know why they donated it? I believe the family line had ended. No children to inherit, you see. Rather sad. The last Miss Ashworth was apparently quite elderly and wanted to ensure the building would be useful to the village. She'd always loved books, from what I've heard." Clara filed this information away. The Ashworth family. Perhaps that was relevant to whatever was happening in the archives. That evening, after closing the Honeyed Leaf, Clara walked to the library through the quiet village. Twilight was falling, painting everything in soft blue and grey. The library looked peaceful, its warm lights glowing in the windows. Beatrice let her in through the front door and locked it behind them. "Thank you for coming," Beatrice said. "I feel better already, just having company." "Have you heard anything yet this evening?" "Not yet. It usually starts around 8:30, once the village has truly settled for the night." They went to Beatrice's office, a small room behind the circulation desk. Beatrice had made tea and set out some biscuits. "I thought we might need sustenance," she said with a slight smile. "We could be here a while." They sat and talked quietly, waiting. Clara told Beatrice what she'd learned from Mrs. Pembroke about the Ashworth family. "Ashworth," Beatrice said thoughtfully. "Yes, there's quite a lot of Ashworth material in the archives. Family papers, documents, photographs. They were prominent in the village for decades. I've been meaning to properly catalogue it all, but there's so much." At exactly 8:30 they both heard it. A distinct sound from upstairs. Footsteps. Clara and Beatrice looked at each other. "That's it," Beatrice whispered. "That's exactly what I've been hearing." The footsteps moved slowly across the floor above them. Not hurried, but deliberate, measured. Then they stopped. After a moment of silence, there came a new sound. A sliding sound, like books being pulled from a shelf. Then the unmistakable rustle of pages. "Someone is up there," Clara whispered back. "Or something is making it sound exactly like someone is up there. Come on, let's go look." Beatrice grabbed a torch, and they quietly climbed the stairs to the archives. The upper floor of the library was one large room, lined with shelves and filing cabinets. Moonlight came through the tall windows, creating pools of silver light and deep shadows. Everything was still and silent. They stood at the top of the stairs, listening. Nothing. The sounds had stopped the moment they started climbing. Clara walked slowly into the room, scanning the shelves, the shadows. "Hello," she called softly. "Is someone here?" Silence. Beatrice joined her, shining the torch around the room. The beam caught book spines, old filing cabinets, a reading table with chairs. Nothing out of place. Nothing moving. "It's just like before," Beatrice said quietly. "The moment I come up here, everything stops. But I know I heard it. We both did." Clara walked to the section where she estimated the sounds had come from. The Ashworth family papers were kept here, in several large boxes on the shelves. She examined them closely. Had any been moved? It was impossible to tell. "Let's go back downstairs," Clara suggested. "But quietly. Let's see if the sounds start again when whoever it is thinks we've left." They crept back down the stairs and positioned themselves in Beatrice's office, door slightly ajar, where they could hear the floor above. They waited in silence. 5 minutes. 10. Then, Just as Clara was beginning to think nothing would happen, the footsteps started again. Same location, same deliberate pace. Clara put a finger to her lips and gestured to Beatrice. Very slowly, very quietly, they moved to the base of the stairs. The sounds continued above them. Footsteps. Pause. The sliding of books, pages turning. This time, Clara ascended the stairs with exaggerated care, avoiding the creaky spots. She'd spent enough time in the library to know which steps squeaked. Beatrice followed, equally cautious. They reached the top of the stairs. The sounds continued. Clara could pinpoint the location now. Definitely the Ashworth section. She edged closer, Beatrice right behind her. And then Clara saw it. Not a ghost, not a person, but a small greyish-brown owl perched on one of the boxes of Ashworth papers. As they watched, frozen, the owl hopped along the shelf, its talons making a distinct tap-tap-tap sound. The sound they'd interpreted as footsteps. The owl stopped at a particular box, tilted its head, and used its beak to pull at something sticking out from the box. The sliding sound. Then it worried at whatever it had pulled free, creating a rustling noise. The sound of turning pages. Beatrice let out a breath halfway between a laugh and a sigh of relief. It's an owl. All this time I've been frightened by an owl. The owl, hearing Beatrice's voice, turned its round head to look at them. Its huge eyes caught the moonlight. For a moment, the three of them stared at each other. Then the owl spread its wings and flew silently to a window. To Clara's surprise, the window was slightly open, just a crack, but enough for the owl to slip through. It perched on the sill for a moment, as if making sure they'd seen its escape route, then vanished into the night. Clara and Beatrice stood in silence for a moment, then both began to laugh. An owl, Beatrice repeated. I've been terrified of an owl. A very persistent owl, Clara added, coming back night after night to the same spot. I wonder what it's been after. They approached the Ashworth boxes. The one where the owl had been perched was slightly disturbed. Clara carefully examined it. Something was sticking out from between the papers inside. The owl had been pulling at it repeatedly, which explained the regular pattern of sounds. Clara gently pulled out what the owl had been worrying at. It was an envelope, old and yellowed, wedged between other documents. It had clearly been there for many years, but the corner had worked loose, protruding just enough to catch the owl's attention. Why would an owl be so interested in an envelope? Beatrice wondered. Clara opened it carefully. Inside was a folded letter and something else, something small and soft. She pulled it out and held it up to the moonlight. A feather, a soft greyish-brown feather. Oh, Beatrice breathed. It's an owl feather. The owl was trying to retrieve a feather that had been placed in this envelope. But why would there be an owl feather in the Ashworth papers? Clara unfolded the letter. The handwriting was old-fashioned, the paper fragile. My dear friend, Clara read aloud. I place this feather here as a reminder of our evenings together, of the wisdom you shared, appearing each night at my window, keeping me company during my research. Your presence made the lonely hours bearable. You will, I hope, continue to visit this place after I'm gone, and perhaps you will recognise this token and know you are remembered with fondness. With gratitude for your silent companionship, Eleanor Ashworth, October 1897. There was a long moment of silence as they absorbed this. Eleanor Ashworth, Beatrice said softly. The last of the Ashworth family, the one who donated this building to become the library. She had a pet owl, or at least a wild owl she'd befriended. And she left a feather here among her papers. Clara looked at the feather in her hand, then at the window where the owl had disappeared. Owls can live 30 years or more in the wild, but this letter is over 120 years old. This can't be the same owl. No, Beatrice agreed, but owls are territorial. They often use the same roosting sites for generations. Perhaps this owl is a descendant, many generations removed of Eleanor's owl, and somehow it knows this place, knows there's something here that belongs to its kind. It was fanciful, perhaps, But there was something moving about the idea. Eleanor Ashworth, alone in this house, befriending a wild owl. And over a century later, an owl returning night after night to the same spot, drawn to the feather its distant ancestor had left behind. The library ghost, Clara said with a smile, is actually a very persistent owl, trying to reclaim a piece of its family history. Just like we've been doing for the human families of Willowbrook, Beatrice added, helping them find and reclaim their histories. Chapter 2. Eleanor's story. The next morning, Clara and Beatrice met at the Honeyed Leaf to discuss their discovery. Beatrice had brought the envelope with Eleanor Ashworth's letter and the feather, now carefully protected in a clear sleeve. They sat by the window in the morning sunshine, examining the letter more closely. "I want to know more about Eleanor Ashworth," Beatrice said. "If she befriended an owl, if she spent lonely hours doing research, there must be more to her story." "The Ashworth papers," Clara said. "You mentioned they haven't been fully catalogued yet. Perhaps there's more information in there." "That's exactly what I was thinking. Would you help me go through them? It's a big job and I'd appreciate the company. Besides, you have a knack for finding the interesting bits." Clara smiled. "I'd be happy to help. When should we start?" "This afternoon. The library is closed on Sundays. We could work without interruptions." That afternoon, they spread out the Ashworth papers on the large table in the archives. There were boxes and boxes of material, family correspondence, household accounts, photographs, journals, newspaper clippings, the accumulation of generations. They divided the work, each taking a box. The papers painted a picture of a prominent village family. The Ashworths had been merchants, successful and respected. But as Clara worked through the materials, she noticed something. The family had grown smaller with each generation. Fewer children, more who never married. By the late 1800s, Eleanor appeared to be the last. In a box of photographs, Clara found several of Eleanor herself. A serious-faced woman with intelligent eyes, dressed in the high-collared fashions of the late 1800s. In one photograph, she stood beside a window of the library building, back when it was her home. And on the windowsill beside her, barely visible but definitely there, was an owl. "Beatrice, look at this." Clara showed her the photograph. Eleanor and her owl. She actually posed with it for a photograph. "That's extraordinary. Owls aren't typically tame." Perhaps it wasn't tame exactly, but clearly it was comfortable enough with her to be photographed. They must have had quite a bond. As they continued searching, they found Eleanor's personal journals. There were several volumes covering the last 20 years of her life. Clara began reading, fascinated. Eleanor wrote beautifully, thoughtfully. She'd been well educated and intellectually curious. She'd loved books, natural history, astronomy, and she'd been lonely. That came through clearly in her writing. As the last of her family living alone in the big house, she'd found companionship in her studies and in the natural world around her. The owl appeared frequently in her journal entries. She called it my faithful friend and my evening companion. One entry from October 1897, around the same time as the letter they'd found, was particularly touching. "My owl appeared at the window again tonight, as it has every evening for the past 5 years. It sits on the sill and watches me work, occasionally offering a soft hoot, as if commenting on my progress. I have come to rely on this companionship more than I would have thought possible. In a village where I am considered odd for living alone, for being too bookish, for never marrying, this creature accepts me without judgment. It comes not for food or shelter. I never feed it or try to cage it, but simply for company, as I am grateful for its company in return. I am growing old. I know that I have not much longer in this world, and I wonder what will become of this house, these books, this collection of knowledge I have spent my life accumulating. I have decided to leave it all to the village, to become a library. Let others find joy and companionship in these books as I have, but I hope my owl will continue to visit this place. I hope whoever comes after me will leave the window slightly open on gentle nights, as I do. And I hope they will not be frightened by the sound of wings in the darkness, but will understand it for what it is. A friend, returning to a beloved place of it." Clara looked up from the journal with tears in her eyes. She wanted the owl to keep visiting, even after her death. That's why she left the feather, so the owl would know it was still welcome. Beatrice was reading over Clara's shoulder. And that's why the window has always stuck slightly open. I noticed it years ago, but never got around to fixing it. I thought it was just an old window that didn't close properly. But maybe, just maybe, it was left that way intentionally. And the owl has been coming back all this time, Clara said. Generation after generation visiting this place. Perhaps the parent teaches the young ones. This is a safe place, a good place. And there's a feather here that smells of our kind. They continued reading through Eleanor's journals and papers. A picture emerged of a remarkable woman. Eleanor had studied natural history, astronomy, botany. She'd corresponded with scholars and scientists, though she'd never had formal recognition for her work. She'd never married, not because no one asked, but because, as she wrote, she valued her independence too much. I have been called unnatural, stubborn, odd, Eleanor wrote in one entry. But I would rather be alone and free to pursue my interests than married and confined to the narrow sphere society allows wives. I have my books, my studies, my owl. I have a rich life, even if it is not the life others expect of me. As the afternoon wore on, Clara and Beatrice pieced together Eleanor's story. She'd been a woman ahead of her time, pursuing intellectual interests when such pursuits were not encouraged for women. She'd lived alone by choice, finding community in her books and in nature, rather than in conventional social structures. And when she knew she was dying, she'd ensured her home would become a place where others could find what she'd found. Knowledge, companionship, a quiet space to think and learn. She created this library, Beatrice said softly. Not just by donating the building, but by envisioning what it could be, a place of learning and community. She understood what a library should be. And she made sure her owl friend would be welcome, Clara added. In a way, she extended her hospitality beyond death, both to human visitors and to her feathered companion. They finished cataloguing the Ashworth papers as the sun set. The materials would be properly archived and made available for researchers. Eleanor's journals would be preserved. Her story would be known. As they locked up the library that evening, Beatrice paused at the window where the owl had entered. "Should we leave it open?" she asked. "Just a crack?" "I think Eleanor would want us to," Clara said. They adjusted the window, leaving it open just enough for an owl to slip through. As if in response, they heard a soft hoot from somewhere in the darkness outside. Clara smiled. "I think our library ghost approves." Chapter 3. The Owl's Return. Over the next few weeks, word spread through Willowbrook about the library owl. Not in a sensational way, but as a gentle story that captured people's imagination. Eleanor Ashworth's friendship with the owl, her wish that it continue to visit the library, the current owl's nightly appearances. It became a beloved piece of village lore. Beatrice set up a small display in the library about Eleanor Ashworth. The photograph of Eleanor with the owl, excerpts from her journals, the feather in its protective sleeve, and information about the current owl, which a local naturalist had identified as a tawny owl, common in the area. Parents began bringing their children to the library in the early evening, hoping to catch a glimpse of the owl. Beatrice, who had initially worried about the library being disrupted by ghost stories, found instead that more people were visiting than ever before. The owl had become a gentle ambassador for the library itself. Clara created a special tea blend in Eleanor's honour. Eleanor's Evening Blend, she called it. Chamomile for calm, lavender for peace, and a hint of mint for clarity of thought. She imagined it was something Eleanor might have drunk during her late-night studies, with her owl companion watching from the window. The blend became popular, especially among students and anyone doing evening reading or studying. People said it helped them focus while keeping them relaxed. Mrs. Pembroke declared it perfect for her evening knitting sessions. Mr. Chen bought a tin to take home, saying it might help him sleep better. One evening, about a month after the initial discovery, Clara was in the library helping Beatrice with a special project. They were creating a more detailed exhibition about Eleanor Ashworth's life and work. Margaret Thornbury had offered to help, bringing her expertise in historical research and women's studies. As they worked, dusk fell outside. The library had closed for the day, but the three women were absorbed in their task. Around 8:30, Clara glanced up and froze. There, perched on the slightly open window, was the owl. It had slipped in silently and was now watching them with those huge, luminous eyes. "Don't move," Clara whispered. "The owl is here." Beatrice and Margaret turned slowly. The owl regarded them calmly, showing no fear. It hopped from the window to a nearby shelf, then to another, making its way toward the section where Eleanor's papers were now stored. The soft tap of its talons was the same sound they'd heard weeks ago. The owl reached the shelf with Eleanor's materials and settled there, as if reclaiming its territory. Then it did something unexpected. It began to preen, grooming its feathers with careful attention. "It's completely comfortable here," Margaret whispered. "It really does think of this place as home." They watched in silence for several minutes as the owl went about its business, occasionally turning its head to check on them, but showing no concern at their presence. Then, as if its inspection was complete, it spread its wings and flew silently back to the window, slipping out into the night. "That was extraordinary," Margaret breathed. "To think that owl's ancestors have been visiting this building for over a century. That's an incredible legacy." "It's like the human legacies we've been discovering," Beatrice observed. "The Hartwell Garden book, the Thornbury journals, Charlotte Ashford's collection, all of them created by people who wanted to pass something on, to ensure their knowledge and care continued beyond their own lives." "Eleanor did the same thing," Clara added. "She passed on her love of learning by creating this library, and she passed on her friendship with the owl by leaving that feather, by asking that the window remain open. She created a legacy of welcome." As spring progressed into early summer, the Eleanor Ashworth exhibition grew. They found more of her research papers, her correspondence with naturalists and scholars. They discovered she'd been particularly interested in owls, had studied their behaviour and habitat extensively. She'd even published a few papers in scientific journals under her initials. EMA, to avoid the prejudice against women scientists. "She was conducting serious research," Margaret said excitedly. "This is important work. I know some ornithologists who would be fascinated by her observations." Eleanor Ashworth was being rediscovered, not just as a generous benefactor who donated a building, but as a scientist and scholar in her own right. The library began to receive inquiries from researchers interested in Eleanor's work. A graduate student asked to examine her owl observations for a thesis. A local historian wanted to include Eleanor in a book about women scientists of the Victorian era. Eleanor, who had been so alone and unrecognised in her lifetime, was finally receiving acknowledgement. One evening, Sophie Hartwell stopped by the Honeyed Leaf with exciting news. "Aunt Eleanor wants to name a section of her garden after Eleanor Ashworth," she announced. "A quiet corner with native plants that attract owls and other wildlife. A sort of living memorial." "What a lovely idea," Clara said warmly. "Eleanor would appreciate that, I think. She loved nature as much as she loved books." "We're going to have a small dedication ceremony next month. Aunt Eleanor hopes you'll come, and Beatrice and Margaret, everyone who helped bring Eleanor Ashworth's story to light." The dedication ceremony was held on a beautiful June evening. Eleanor Hartwell had created a tranquil space in a corner of her vast garden. Native trees and shrubs that provided habitat for owls, a small bench for quiet contemplation, and a simple stone marker with an inscription. "In memory of Eleanor Mary Ashworth, 1855 to 1923. Scholar, naturalist, friend to all creatures wild and domestic. She gave this village its library and showed us the value of quiet companionship." As the small group gathered for the dedication, the sun set behind the trees, and just as Eleanor Hartwell unveiled the marker, they heard it. A soft hoot from somewhere in the garden. Everyone looked up. There, perched in an oak tree, was an owl, perhaps the same one that visited the library, perhaps a different one. It was impossible to say. But its presence felt like a blessing, an approval of this memorial to its long-ago friend. Chapter 4. Unexpected Connections. A few weeks after the garden dedication, Clara received an unexpected visitor at the Honeyed Leaf. A woman in her 70s, elegantly dressed with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. "Excuse me," the woman said. "Are you Clara Whitmore? Beatrice Morgan at the library suggested I speak with you. I am. Please come in. Can I offer you some tea? That would be lovely, thank you. The woman settled at a table, and Clara brought her the Eleanor's evening blend, somehow sensing it would be appropriate. I'm Judith Ashworth Gray, the woman said. Eleanor Ashworth was my great-great-aunt. Clara's interest sharpened immediately. How wonderful that you've come. We've been learning so much about Eleanor. She was a remarkable woman. She was. And I'm glad her story is finally being told properly. She was always spoken of in my family as the odd one, the spinster aunt who lived alone with her books and her owl. But my grandmother, Eleanor's niece, always spoke of her with respect. She said Eleanor was the most intelligent person she'd ever known. Judith sipped her tea, then smiled. This is delicious. What's in it? Chamomile, lavender, and mint. I created it in Eleanor's honour, actually. I thought it might be something she would have enjoyed. How thoughtful. She would have loved that, I think. She was very particular about her tea. Judith reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather journal. I've brought something I thought you and Beatrice might be interested in. It's Eleanor's personal diary from her last year. My grandmother kept it all these years. She wanted to donate it to the library eventually, but she passed away before she could arrange it. I found it among her effects and immediately thought of bringing it here, especially after Beatrice told me about the owl visiting the library. Clara accepted the journal carefully. This is wonderful. May I look? Please do. That's why I brought it. Clara opened the journal carefully. The entries were dated 1922 to 1923, the last year of Eleanor's life. The handwriting was shaky in places, showing the effects of age and illness, but the mind behind the words was still sharp, still curious, still engaged with the world. Eleanor wrote about her decision to donate the house to become a library, about her hopes for what it would become, and she wrote extensively about her owl. My faithful companion grows old as I do, one entry read. It no longer flies as silently or as swiftly as it once did. We are both reaching the end of our time. But I take comfort in knowing this place will continue. The library will serve the village long after I am gone, and I believe the owls will continue to visit. They have nested in these trees for generations. Perhaps they will always remember this as a safe place, a welcoming place. That is my hope. Another entry, written just weeks before her death, was particularly moving. I have lived an unconventional life. I never married, never had children, never followed the path society laid out for women of my class and time. There were those who pitied me, who thought my life empty and sad. But they were wrong. I have had the life I chose. I have studied what interested me, thought my own thoughts, made my own decisions. I have found companionship in unexpected places, in books, in nature, in the simple presence of a wild creature who chose to visit me evening after evening. I have been lonely at times, yes, but I have never been bored, never been stifled, never been forced to be less than I am. And in creating this library, I hope to give others the same freedom I found. The freedom to learn, to think, to be curious, to find their own path. That is a good legacy, I think. Clara felt tears prick her eyes as she read. She understood exactly what she was creating. Not just a building full of books, but a space for people to become who they wanted to be. That's exactly right, Judith said softly. Great-aunt Eleanor was ahead of her time. She would be so pleased to know the library is still serving that purpose, and that her owl is still visiting. They talked for over an hour, Judith sharing family stories about Eleanor, how she'd been considered eccentric but had been quietly respected, how she'd helped educate several young women in the village, loaning them books and encouraging their intellectual curiosity, how she'd been a quiet supporter of women's suffrage, though she'd been too elderly to march by the time the movement gained momentum. She did her part by example, Judith said, by living an independent life, by showing it was possible for a woman to be educated, self-sufficient and content without a husband. That took courage in her time. Before Judith left, she officially donated Eleanor's final journal to the library. Beatrice was thrilled when Clara brought it to her that afternoon. This fills in so much, Beatrice said, carefully reading through the entries. Eleanor's own words about her motivations, her hopes for the library. This is invaluable. They added the journal to the Eleanor Ashworth exhibition, which had become a permanent fixture in the library. Visitors loved reading Eleanor's words, learning about her friendship with the owl, understanding her vision for the library. The exhibition had sparked something in Willowbrook, a renewed appreciation for the library as a community space. People began leaving books with notes, in honour of Eleanor Ashworth, who taught us the value of knowledge. The library's donation fund grew. People wanted to support this place that Eleanor had created, to ensure it continued serving the community she'd loved. And the owl kept visiting. Not every night, but regularly enough that its presence became a familiar part of library life. Beatrice no longer startled at the sounds from upstairs. Instead, she'd smile and think, Eleanor's friend is visiting again. Chapter 5. Legacy of Welcome. As summer deepened, Clara found herself reflecting on all the mysteries she'd helped solve over the past year. The garden book, the missing journals, Charlotte Ashford's hidden library, and now Eleanor Ashworth's story. Each mystery had revealed something similar. People working to preserve knowledge, to pass on what they valued, to create legacies of care and learning. And so often those people had been women. Women working quietly, without recognition, creating value that lasted far beyond their own lives. One warm July evening, Clara closed the honeyed leaf and walked to the library. Beatrice had invited her to stay after hours, to experience the owl's visit in the quiet of the closed library. They sat in the archives as dusk fell, talking quietly about Eleanor Ashworth, about the owl, about legacies. "I've been thinking," Beatrice said, "about how Eleanor felt she had to publish under her initials to be taken seriously as a naturalist, how Charlotte Ashford had to hide her collection of women's writings, how Margaret's grandmother's knowledge was nearly lost. All these women working, learning, preserving, but not being recognised. But they persisted anyway," Clara said. "Even without recognition, even without acknowledgement, they kept working because the work itself mattered." "Yes. And eventually, someone comes along who cares enough to search, to understand, to remember. Someone like you." Clara shook her head. "Not just me. All of us working together. You, Emma, Margaret, Eleanor, Sophie. We're all part of this. Remembering the women who came before, preserving what they created, making sure their work continues to matter." As if on cue, they heard the soft tap of talons on the windowsill. The owl had arrived. It slipped through the open window with effortless grace and made its way to its usual spot near Eleanor's papers. Tonight, though, instead of immediately preening or searching, it simply sat, watching them with those huge, knowing eyes. "It's beautiful," Clara whispered. "I can see why Eleanor loved it." They sat in companionable silence with the owl for perhaps 20 minutes. The owl seemed content with their presence, occasionally turning its head or adjusting its position, but never showing alarm. Then, as silently as it had arrived, it spread its wings and glided back to the window, pausing on the sill. For just a moment it looked back at them, as if in acknowledgement, before disappearing into the summer night. "Every time I see it," Beatrice said softly, "I think about the continuity. That owl's ancestors knew Eleanor, and through some instinct we don't fully understand, it still comes here, still knows this as a safe place. It's a living connection to the past." "Like the stories we've been uncovering," Clara added. "Living connections to the women who came before us. Their knowledge, their care, their work, all still alive and relevant." Over the following weeks, the library became a centre for community in new ways. Inspired by Eleanor's story, several women started a reading group focused on early women scientists and naturalists. Margaret offered to lead discussions about women's intellectual history. Eleanor Hartwell began hosting garden and library events, connecting the two spaces Eleanor Ashworth had loved. And Clara continued to serve Eleanor's evening blend at the Honeyed Leaf, with a small card explaining its origin and honouring Eleanor's memory. Mrs. Pembroke became one of the reading group's most enthusiastic members. "To think," she said one afternoon at the Honeyed Leaf, "that all these remarkable women were here in our village. Working, thinking, creating, and we never knew about them. We must do better at remembering our own history." "That's exactly what we're trying to do," Clara agreed. remember and celebrate the people who shaped our community. The owl continued its visits throughout the summer and into the autumn. It became a beloved fixture of the library, featured in the local newspaper, visited by school groups learning about wildlife and local history. But it was never disturbed or harassed. The community understood it was wild, free and welcome, just as Eleanor had wanted. One September evening, as Clara was closing the shop, Emma appeared with news. "You'll never guess what I found," Emma said excitedly. "In the bookshop's old records, a list of books Eleanor Ashworth purchased from the shop in the early 1900s, and many of them are still in my stock, on the shelves." "That's wonderful," Clara said. "Eleanor's books still available for people to read. It gets better. Several of the books have her bookplate inside, a simple label with her name and the date she acquired them. I'm going to create a special section for them, Eleanor Ashworth's collection, so people can read the actual books she read, held, learned from. It was perfect." Another way of preserving Eleanor's presence. That night, Clara sat in her flat above the honeyed leaf, thinking about Eleanor Ashworth. About a woman who'd lived alone but had never been lonely. Who'd found companionship in books and in a wild owl. Who'd created something lasting by giving away what she had. The library, free for all to use. The collection, preserved for future readers. The space, open and welcoming to all creatures. Eleanor had understood something fundamental. That legacy wasn't about keeping things for yourself, but about sharing them freely. About creating spaces where others could grow, learn, become themselves. Clara looked around her own shop. In its way, the honeyed leaf was similar. A space for gathering, for conversation, for quiet contemplation. Not as grand as a library, but serving a similar purpose. Creating community, fostering connection, offering comfort. Perhaps that was Clara's own legacy. Not books or gardens or hidden collections, but this daily work of care. The tea brewed with attention. The conversations encouraged. The quiet space maintained in a busy world. Small acts, repeated day after day, creating something that mattered. Marmalade jumped into her lap, purring his approval of this philosophy. Clara smiled and stroked his soft fur. "We're all creating legacies," she told him. "Some grand, some small, but all meaningful." Marmalade, being a cat, cared only about dinner and was unmoved by philosophical musings. But he purred louder, which Clara chose to interpret as agreement. The following month, the library held a special evening event. A celebration of Eleanor Ashworth and her library. The community room was packed. People came to hear readings from Eleanor's journals, to view the expanded exhibition, to learn about her scientific work. Judith Ashworth Gray had returned for the event, bringing more family papers and photographs to donate. Margaret gave a presentation about Eleanor's place in the history of women naturalists. Emma displayed the books from Eleanor's personal collection. And as the evening drew to a close, something magical happened. Through the open windows of the library, an owl called. Everyone fell silent, listening. The call came again, clear and resonant in the twilight. Then, to everyone's amazement, an owl flew past the windows, visible in the last light of day. It circled the building once, twice, as if blessing the gathering, then flew off into the darkening sky. The crowd was hushed, moved by what felt like a visitation, a sign of approval from the natural world Eleanor had loved so much. "That was extraordinary," Judith said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's as if Eleanor herself sent that owl to say thank you, for remembering her, for honouring her work, for keeping her library alive." Whether it was coincidence or something more, no one could say. But it felt significant, a moment of connection across time, between past and present, between the human and natural worlds. As people filed out into the evening, talking excitedly about the owl, Clara stayed behind to help Beatrice clean up. "This was beautiful," Clara said. "Eleanor would have been so pleased." "I think she would," Beatrice agreed. "We've done what she hoped for. We've kept her memory alive, shared her story, honoured her work. And we've kept the library as a place of welcome, just as she intended." They walked out together into the soft September night. The library windows glowed behind them, warm and inviting. somewhere in the darkness, an owl called again. "Eleanor's friend," Beatrice said with a smile, still keeping watch. Clara walked home through the peaceful village, feeling deeply content. Another mystery solved, another story told, another legacy honoured. The village held its histories close, remembered its people, valued what they had created. And Clara was grateful to be part of that continuity, part of the work of remembering, preserving, connecting. In the weeks that followed, life in Willowbrook returned to its gentle rhythms. The excitement over the owl settled into comfortable familiarity. It visited regularly, and people stopped being surprised by it. It was simply part of the library now, as much a fixture as the books themselves. Eleanor's legacy continued in many small ways. The reading group flourished, exploring works by women writers and scientists. The library's Eleanor Ashworth Fund grew, ensuring resources for maintaining the building and expanding the collection. Emma's bookshop section of Eleanor's books became a destination for book lovers. And the garden Eleanor Hartwell had created attracted wildlife, including occasionally visiting owls. Everything connected, past and present, human and nature, knowledge and wisdom all flowing together. One crisp October evening, Clara sat at her window above the honeyed leaf, watching the stars emerge. She thought about all the women whose stories she'd helped uncover. Agnes Hartwell with her garden remedies, Catherine Thornbury and Mary Henderson with their botanical knowledge, Charlotte Ashford with her secret library, Eleanor Ashworth with her owl and her love of learning. Each of them had worked quietly, created carefully, hoped that their knowledge would endure. And it had. Not because they were famous or powerful, but because they'd cared enough to preserve what they knew, to pass it on, trusting that someone, someday, would value it. Clara understood that she was part of that chain, receiving what had been passed forward, preserving it in turn, adding her own small contributions. The honeyed leaf was her offering, a space for community, for conversation, for comfort. Perhaps someday, long after she was gone, someone would sit in this building and think about the woman who'd run a tea shop here, who'd helped uncover the village's hidden stories, who'd believed that small acts of care mattered. That would be enough. More than enough. To be remembered for caring, for creating space, for helping others find what had been lost. That was a good legacy. Marmalade climbed into her lap, settling with a contented purr. Clara stroked his soft fur and looked out at the sleeping village. All was peaceful. All was well. The mysteries had been solved, the stories had been told, the legacies had been honoured. And tomorrow, the honeyed leaf would open again. There would be tea to brew, customers to serve, conversations to encourage. The work would continue, day by day, cup by cup, creating connection, preserving community, building something that would last, not through grandeur but through consistency. Through daily care, repeated acts of kindness, sustained attention to what mattered. In the library, the owl would visit again, finding the window open, the space welcoming. In the gardens throughout the village, plants grew from seeds carefully saved and passed forward. In the bookshops and homes, people read books preserved by those who'd come before. Everything connected, everything continuing. The village slept under its blanket of stars. In Hartwell Manor, Eleanor tended her seedlings, planning next spring's garden. At Ivy Cottage, Margaret wrote her thesis, documenting women's knowledge across time. In the bookshop, Emma shelved books, including those that had once belonged to Eleanor Ashworth. And in the library, with its window left slightly open, the archives held their treasures, journals and papers, photographs and letters, all the accumulated wisdom of generations. And somewhere in the darkness outside, an owl called. A sound that had echoed through this village for over a century. A reminder that some things endure. Some friendships transcend time. Some welcomes are never withdrawn. Clara finished her tea and prepared for bed, feeling that deep peace that comes from work that matters. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. New customers, perhaps. New conversations, certainly. Maybe even new mysteries to solve, new stories to uncover. But whatever came, Clara was ready. She had found her place in Willowbrook, found her purpose in this gentle work of preservation and connection. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything she needed. The night deepened over Willowbrook. The last lights went out in windows. The village settled into sleep. And in that darkness, the owl flew silently through familiar territory. Past the library with its open window. Past the tea shop where a ginger cat dozed on a windowsill. Past the gardens and cottages, the church and the green. Over the village it had known for generations. Over the place that remembered Eleanor Ashworth and her friendship with its ancestors. Over a community that valued its history, preserved its stories, welcomed all creatures. The owl called once more, a sound of contentment, of belonging. Then it disappeared into the night. But it would return. It always did. This was home. This was the place of welcome. This was where the window was left open, where the feather waited, where the memory of a kind woman's friendship endured. All was well in Willowbrook. All was as it should be. The mysteries were solved, the legacies honoured, the stories told. And in the morning, the village would wake to a new day, to tea shops opening and libraries welcoming, to gardens growing and books being read, to the continuation of all the small acts of care that built community and preserved knowledge, to life continuing, as it always had, as it always would, gentle, purposeful, meaningful, in Willowbrook, where the past and present lived side by side, where stories waited to be discovered, where every mystery led to understanding, and where an owl still visited a library, keeping an old promise of friendship alive. The end.